Right, so we'll kick off, everyone. Firstly, thanks very much for joining today. So the topic of our webinar today, as I'm sure you know, is can you build your intranet on Microsoft Teams? And the way we're going to run this today, we're going to try to keep it conversational. There are 4 of us on the panel, and we're very happy to introduce a surprise guest as well, who wasn't on the original lineup. That's Jess from Wizdom. Everyone will introduce themselves in a second. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. So we're going to run a couple of polls as we go through the webinar. So do please take part and answer the questions. Very quick and easy. We're also going to run a survey at the end of the webinar just to see what you thought and get a little bit of kind of final sort of feedback and thoughts on the topic as well. If you've got any questions, please ask them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that. We may leave a question to the end, but if it's very kind of topical for the discussion, we might actually just pick it up there and then. So yes, so I'm going to kick off now with the first poll, and it's really as the panelists are going to introduce themselves. It's just a question for it's a chance for you to tell us which is your primary job function. So whilst that's going, John, do you want to kick off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm John Scott. I'm the head of user experience at Content Formula. So I am involved very early on in projects, running discovery sessions, understanding business requirements, user needs, trying to marry those 2 things together as much as possible, and coming up with proposed solutions that can then be implemented.
Great, thanks, John. Joe, can you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Perry. So I head up the technical team at Content Formula. So that means working very closely with John when it comes to architecting the solution, all the way through to delivery and supporting that solution once it's gone live.
Right, and finally, Jess from Wizdom, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jess Lassen. I'm the head of product management in LiveTiles. Previously, I was working for a decade for Wizdom, building intranets. So right now, looking at the opportunities of actually disrupting the old way of building intranets and just looking at how we can embrace the features of Teams and actually bring a lot of the common intranet workloads into Teams. So it's a perfect session to dive into that today.
Great, thanks very much. So just so you know, we've now closed the poll. It turns out that our biggest audience today is made up of people who work in IT at 39%, then 36% work in an intranet team, 11% work in comms and or marketing, and 14% are other. We've got 0% of people from HR. And that's quite a pleasing mix of people, because the way we're going to be dealing with the topic today, we're going to kind of be sort of jumping around. Some of it, the discussion will be technical. Some of it will be talking about things like communications and intranet functionalities and that kind of thing. So there's a bit of everything for everyone, I hope, but hopefully useful for everybody. So before we start, I just wanted to just introduce Content Formula. I know lots of you on the webinar actually know who we are, but I imagine there are some who don't, and we're obviously very keen on telling you who we are. So we're a digital workplace consultancy. We've been around since 2005. We're based in London. We build solutions on Office 365, SharePoint, Teams, and the Power Platform. Those are the main tools that we use. Though sometimes we use other tools, but in particular, we use plugin tools that sit on top of SharePoint and other parts of Office 365. And so we resell various platforms and tools, including Wizdom by LiveTiles, some of the other LiveTiles products. We've also got a learning management system by a company called eLearning Force, and that's called LMS 365. And we also resell and implement Nintext solutions as well. So on top of those kind of build services, we also have a managed support service, which is an SLA-based support service for you know, your intranet or any other application that you might have within the Office 365 world. As an organization, we've got a strong focus on UX and usability. And so John, who's on the panel today, he gets involved in the design of virtually every single solution that we build. And he's the one who kind of really looks at the UX components of our solutions. Finally, we're proud to say we're multi-award winning. We've won various awards over the years. Yeah, you can see there the logos of kind of typical companies that we work with. So we've got the big blue chip clients that we work with, but we also, we're not snobby about that. We work with very small organizations as well. So some of our, I think probably our smallest client is about 30 people or something like that. So clients of all shapes and sizes. So that's the marketing spiel. We're now going to move on and actually kick off the main discussion. And I'm just going to start talking really about the importance of teams nowadays. I mean, it almost goes without saying, but the COVID-19 crisis has clearly led to a huge adoption of Teams over the last couple of months. We've got several clients. We've been talking to them for some time about launching Teams, and some of them have ummed and ahed and you know have not done much beyond maybe running a pilot Teams or something like that, and they haven't jumped in. But obviously the COVID crisis has really kind of accelerated things and has forced people to jump into Teams. And I think it's been, in terms of adoption, it's been one of the most successful adoption exercises that we could have hoped for, although obviously not under the best circumstances. So the latest data we've got is from Microsoft that there are 44 million daily active users on Teams, and that's gone up tremendously just in the last month, well, in the last couple of months or so. So I just to kind of start off our discussion, guys, what do you think? Why would somebody want to bring their intranet into Teams beyond the mere fact that there's obviously a large audience there? So
yeah, I'll just take that one quickly. That is a big one. Obviously, there's a large audience there. Why would you want to bring into Teams? Well, you've already got lots of eyes looking at things in Teams. People, I guess, more and more so doing their sort of daily work, particularly if they're information workers. They'll be doing lots of collaboration with colleagues. They'll be having conversations. They'll be having meetings like this, and they'll be sharing files and iterating through versions of files. They'll be doing that in Teams. And one compelling reason to have an intranet in Teams is, well, why make them leave that experience? You're just much less likely to get people to see important content, whether it's news and comm stuff or process related information and so on. You're just much less likely to get them to see it if they have to go somewhere else and interrupt their workflow. That's one reason. And then of course there's the kind of the cost implications as well of having a separate platform where your intranet lives. Which can be significant. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's obviously the growth is massive, but beneath it, there's a nice technology stack too. So there's a lot of tools that we can leverage and push straight out to users using kind of nice interfaces, using kind of the Office UI fabric to kind of keep these experiences consistent. Obviously, we don't want to bog users down with too much. Like that's Teams, I guess, has got quite a cool factor at the moment, if that's a thing to say. We don't want to kind of give them too much and overload, but there's a lot of stuff we can do with apps, and there's a whole app store out there that allows us to kind of get apps from kind of other solutions. But I think the whole app model gives us quite a good framework to be able to distribute really nice experiences to users. So that's, I think, a technology reason to go down the Teams route.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would also just, if I could just chime in, so I would just second what you said, John, because I think why wouldn't you actually bring your intranet in, or at least why wouldn't you bring your intranet workloads into Teams? Because I think what we're seeing is that Teams is now getting more of it's almost a natural place to hang out when you're at work, right? COVID or post-COVID or pre-COVID, or I think it will be where users will collaborate, they will chat. It's basically taking all what we saw with Skype, collaboration spaces, video meetings. It's just where they are. So why not bring those intranet workloads to them where they are? So I think, yeah, totally. Why not?
Yeah, I think those are all great reasons. I think it's important to talk about why it might not be a good idea as well. I don't know, some of you may have attended Sam Marshall's webinar recently, Sam from Clearbox Consulting, and he was talking about a similar topic. And one of the points he made was that, there's a danger that Teams could become a bit of a Swiss Army knife. Currently, it does stuff very well. It does collaboration very well. It does file sharing very well. Chat's good as well, and notifications and stuff. But there's a danger that you could just add too many things, too many blades and widgets onto your penknife, so that what started out as a very neat kind of little slim penknife that you can put in your pocket turns into this great big massive unwieldy thing that you can't really do much with anymore. So I think that's an interesting kind of counterpoint to all of that.
If I could just add it, I think you're totally right, because what you shouldn't do is just take your learning from doing intranet for the past many years and then just try to put that into Teams. You need to understand what Teams is really good at, like the collaboration, the chat, it has the apps. So you need to force yourself to rethink how you actually want to bring those solutions to the end users, and not just take your learnings and try, okay, information architecture, just put that into Teams as well. Policies, no, I'm just writing a lot of chat posts. Not really working like that. So you need to understand the platform before you just transfer all your previous knowledge into the new world.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think something that we'll be covering in the discussion today. So I think an important thing for us to just cover off, really, and it's a good follow-up from that last point, yes. And John, maybe you can take this. Can you give us a kind of just a quick overview of the Teams core functions, and also, you're the expert in this space as well. Tell us, what are the core functions that you'd expect to see on a good intranet as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just quick. Can you share my screen for this, please? I've just got a couple of things to show here.
Yeah. Hang on a sec. I need to find you on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, you might be wondering why we're not doing this on Teams, guys, because it would be the obvious thing to present on. But we were actually on a Teams webinar this morning, and it went a bit wrong, actually. So I think we're quite pleased that we did this on GoToWebinar instead of Teams. But hopefully Microsoft are going to catch up with that. So sorry, John, go ahead. What are the kind of Teams core functions, and what are the kind of core functions you'd expect to see in an intranet?
Yeah, sure. So first I'll just talk about the kind of typical intranet pillars. So I've got 5 things here that your typical intranet, a good intranet, will be doing for people, allow people to sort of do things. One of them is communications and engagement. Now there's sort of subcategories of that, of course. There's broadcast comms, and there's sort of peer-to-peer, employee-to-employee communications as well. That's one pillar. You've got collaboration on a traditional intranet. That might be like a SharePoint intranet, that might be team sites or working areas, something like that. Then you've got knowledge discovery and sharing, quite a broad topic, because that's covering things like being able to find formal policies, like maternity leave policy, for example, but also being able to find slightly looser guidance information, like how to use Teams effectively. It might be some sort of training material that I might look for on the intranet. Then another one, connecting with people. Mostly that's about people search, but it does include some other things as well. And also you've got completing tasks. So actually doing things like completing your expenses. You might not do that on the intranet in its entirety, but you often start the process from the intranet. The intranet will guide you to the right place to do it. So these typical intranet pillars, if we then think about what does Teams do already, which of these does it address? I can pick off straight away collaboration and say, well, it does that pretty well. There's all sorts of facets to Teams that are dealing with all sorts of elements of collaboration, whether it's online face-to-face virtual meetings, or it's working on the same files and iterating through versions, or it's group chat and so on. It's doing all that stuff pretty well. So you can say, well, Teams has got that covered, but what about some of these other pillars? If you look at, for example, communications and engagement, now some of those sub elements or facets of that pillar, I would say Teams does do. You can go on Teams and have a group, a team that is your whole company, for example, particularly if you're a smaller company, and you can post news in there, and you can mark it as important to set it apart from normal conversations to some degree. So there's things you can do in that area, but it certainly doesn't give you a true sort of publishing experience that you would expect to have on a modern intranet. It doesn't allow you to publish news in a sort of magazine format, and have publishing control workflows, like approval workflows, so that you can have content editors and contributing to a story and so on and so forth. It just doesn't really do that to the same degree. So in that pillar, it certainly doesn't really live up to what you'd expect from an intranet. Knowledge discovery and sharing is a sort of similar story, because you can put policies into a team and people can go there and find them, but it doesn't really provide you with a user journey that will guide people effectively to the right content, as you could do on an intranet. So again, you can do it-ish, but it's not that sophisticated. Connecting with people, you can search for people in Teams, but you don't get all the extra controls that you'd expect from a good people search tool, like being able to search on job title, skills, projects. You can do a name search and it will potentially find a person and a chat with them or something like that. So it's, again, not really doing what you'd expect. And completing tasks, well, unless the task is upload a file for somebody else to look at or work on, you don't really do that either in Teams. So there's sort of arguably 4 of these that Teams doesn't really do out of the box, and it leaves quite a lot of gaps there for us to look into basically in this session. So that's what we're going to do now. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So thanks, John. I think at this point I'm gonna put a question to the audience. So another quick poll, and I'll launch that now. And the title of the poll is, what are the most important features that you'd want to see in a Teams? So just before I launch that, sadly, the software, the GoToWebinar software, only allows us to put 5 options down. So it's going to be just a toss-up of those 5. But I will launch it anyway, and let's see what people come back with. So I'll just give you like a few moments to answer that question, everyone. Okay, so we've got, I'll leave the voting running. The numbers are kind of settling down now. So yeah, we've got 51% of people have voted. So 89% say news, 71% say knowledge management and search, 55% say pages for static content, 55 for common tasks and workflows, and 51 for policies and procedures. So clearly news and knowledge management and search kind of stands out. And I'll close the poll and now share the results. But yeah, that's quite an interesting result. I think news doesn't surprise me at all, but knowledge management and search kind of does a little bit, because obviously search is a piece that we've got within Teams, and I think that some people might feel that there are perhaps some problems when it comes to search with Teams. But I'm on that topic, guys. Can we just talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges that we've got with Teams? And I'll kind of kick off that piece. And I think one of the things, when you're thinking about setting up an intranet on Teams, one of the problems we've got is we've got a very kind of flat structure with Teams. We've got, essentially we've got all of our teams listed down on the left-hand side. But we don't have, the luxury of having a mega menu navigation like you might have on say a SharePoint intranet or even a Wizdom, a LiveTiles Wizdom intranet. That I think that's one of the things that's probably going to really present a challenge for people building their intranet on Teams. Anything else from the panelists?
Yeah, so just going back to the poll a second, I mean, I guess the news factor here is a big deal at the moment, obviously with coronavirus going on, and things like frontline workers being able to distribute information to frontline workers or people who are kind of, I guess, not in the office more. Teams can be good at distributing news, but I guess one of the challenges that isn't so much a challenge today on intranets is actually targeting and the ability to actually personalize those feeds of news information. So Teams is getting better. It's like we're having the ability to create kind of like these dynamic teams, and the ability to kind of say, well, because you're in a certain department or office, you can join that team. But kind of the real ability to actually send those targeted, focused communications that we're so used to inside of SharePoint intranets, it's something I think could be something that Teams perhaps needs to catch up on if we're going to use it as a real solid intranet platform.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I think I would just, that's actually a interesting angle, Joe, because I don't think we should see Teams as the tool for everything. So I still think that like communication, like proper news articles, they are probably gonna get posted in another system. Policies and procedures are probably gonna get stored in another content system, but it's about reaching the users with those policies and procedures and with the communications in Teams. I don't think you want to create all your content in Teams. You might want to create content in your collaboration spaces, but I think you will still either publish on a more mature communication platform, maybe even publishing news articles in SharePoint or policies and procedures in SharePoint, and just feeding it to the users when they need to read that news or target it to specific people in Teams. So that's basically my view on it.
I think that's a good point. Yes, but I think what I'd say kind of counter to that is that there are probably some organizations, and I'd say almost certainly smaller organizations, that are thinking, well, actually we don't want to have a separate platform, we want to have everything in Teams, just keep it very simple. And I think that's another thing about Teams, is that if you did want to have, I mean, it's kind of a follow-on from what you're saying, yes, which is if you did want to have something for a big organization. It's really hard to, big organizations, their intranets can be really large, really complex, made up of many moving parts, often different systems as well, and actually replicating that in teams is going to be very difficult. So it's kind of going back to Sam Marshall's kind of Swiss Army knife analogy. It's kind of about having the right blades in there, the right tools that are going to be useful for your job, but not trying to cram everything in.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I do think as well. I think something that you mentioned already, Dan, but the UI of Teams, it does provide, Microsoft are providing people with the ability to add in apps in a couple of main places that we'll see in a minute, and then from there you sort of can pan out to your own information architecture, your own menu systems, and so on and so forth. But those limitations at the first sort of level of interaction, they do mean that stuff is sort of hidden away a little bit more than you'd want. It's a bit sort of a nooks and crannies. There's like various nooks and crannies to Teams that you've got to traverse down before you get to the stuff you want. And so however at the moment you try and implement an intranet in Teams, you've always got to fall into line with how those things work. Those navigational elements work at the moment, and they are a little bit limiting. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to actually, what are our options if we're going to do something in Teams. We've got various tools. Before we do that, let's just kind of quickly refresh on what are the key elements that we've got within Teams. So this is our own Teams environment. Obviously, we've got the search across the top. Down here, we've got this side rail, and we can add. You can see we've got various apps in here, and obviously we've got the kind of the default items on there. And then obviously we've got our Teams space. Here, where when I say that it's a very flat structure, this is what I mean. We've got this kind of list really of just all of our teams, and that's quite difficult to navigate. So I think one of the things not to do is, if you are thinking about building your intranet in Teams, is don't start developing this kind of complex structure of departments. Each department is a team, and then you have like different parts of the department as channels. I think you're going to quickly get into a real mess if you do go down that route. But we have spoken to organizations that have been tempted and have actually started to work on things like that. I think it just gets very unwieldy. But yeah, so we've got this list. We've obviously got our channels, and each channel has, we've got files. We've got our posts, and then you can add tabs. So these are the kind of the architecture bits that we've got to play with. I think what I'll do now is we'll now go through each of the options that we think we've got to play with when we're building a team. And the first one I'm going to talk about is org-wide teams. So some of you may not be aware of this because you don't necessarily have access to the Teams admin controls in your organization, but there is a tool which allows you, within those Teams admin controls, which allows you to set up what is called an org-wide team, and you can see this is highlighted here. I'm pointing it out with my mouse pointer here, and what that means, the key thing about org-wide teams is that when you build a team which is org-wide, that means everybody in the organization is automatically put inside that team, and they can't leave the team. They don't have that option to leave. External users are not automatically put in, though you can actually invite external users into that org-wide team as well. So that's kind of one of the options that we've got to play with. There are some certain things that you need to think about with an org-wide team, and that is that firstly, you can only have 5,000 5,000 users in an org-wide team, which I think is probably okay. I think, you know, if you are bigger than that as an organization, you probably got to ask yourself, actually, should we, you know, do we want an org-wide team for so many people? I don't know, there might be some use cases, but I think you've got to be asking yourself some serious questions if you are bigger than that. I think there are other things that are worth thinking about with an org-wide team. Obviously, you don't, you know, if everyone in your organization's in there, you want to kind of lock things down a bit, because it could get quite chaotic. Because as you know, in a normal team, you can do things like anyone can, for example, set up a new channel, or they can post and things like that. And with all teams, you may not be aware of this, but if you go up here into the ellipsis, you go to manage team, you've got these controls, and the ones that are the most useful are member permissions here. And this is where you can do things such as prevent people from, you know, adding or removing channels, adding or removing apps and tabs and this kind of thing. And we can also stop people from posting as well, so that any posts that come through to the organization are going to be, you know, just from, you know, 1 or 2 nominated people within the organization who've got permissions to post. Otherwise, it's locked down. So yeah, it's worth, if you do set up an all-wide team, think hard about, yeah, what are the kind of the governance controls you want to put in place. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about all-wide teams. There's obviously stuff online that you can find out about that. Microsoft has published stuff about all-wide teams, how to set them up and everything. But yeah, so our second option when it comes to what you can do on Teams is actually quite a simple one, similar to all-wide teams, and that's showing your existing intranet in Teams. And John, do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, sure. If you can just share my screen again, please. Thanks. So you should just see it now. So here I've got I'm using the Condense app, which is a LiveTiles product. Allows companies to have basically an intranet with news and information pages that can be linked into Office 365, but also can be separate from it, and is ideal for reaching field force workers on mobile, for example, with no Office 365 licenses. So this is my sort of intranet homepage in Condense. I've got my news here. This is in the browser, obviously not in an app, but it could be in the app as well. Now, if I wanted to bring this news content into Teams, then I can do that. I can go into Teams here. I'm just going to load up Teams. I can click on go into a team, like my Teams intranet team here. I can click on the plus icon and add a tab, and then I can actually just, oh, it's gone a bit slow, sorry. Yeah, okay. And then from there, I can basically add in my Condense app, or I could just add it as a website as well, an HTTP link. I've already done it, so I'll just close that to go through the whole process. I'll open my tab here that I've created, I've called it News, and then in there it loads in my content from Condense. So it's just going to load that now, and you'll sort of see the content exactly the same way as you would see it in a web browser. But now obviously it's in Teams. People wouldn't have to leave the Teams experience to see this. They'd have to navigate to that tab, but they wouldn't have to leave Teams. So sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, on this particular example, I was actually playing around with this, and I think something we haven't talked about so far is the Teams mobile app, and I was testing this particular integration out on the Teams mobile app, and when you click that news tab, it actually launches the Condense app. So it actually takes you outside of Teams. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I can see kind of cases for and against. But yeah, okay. So that's quite a straightforward option, isn't it? When it comes to showing your intranet in Teams, it's not very high tech. It can be done in just a matter of minutes. I think for us it's probably not that exciting, is it? Because it's not. It's really just Teams acting as a browser. So, John, you're going to talk about perhaps something a little bit more exciting, which is persuading people to actually build their own SharePoint intranet site and then bringing that into Teams. So do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, so similar concept really in terms of, there I was showing a condensed intranet, and I think I'm still sharing my screen. Yes, I am. Yep. And now I'm going to show how, if we were in, we've got SharePoint as well in our organization. We've built out a SharePoint intranet. It's just an out-of-the-box one. This is it here. I've got some news on there. I've got Yammer hooked up to a Yammer group. I've got recent documents, events, so on and so forth. Various things you'd expect from an intranet, and people can already access this via SharePoint. Via SharePoint in our tenant. People in the organization can access this. But I want to surface this in Teams. The process is very similar. I'd go into Teams here and go to the plus here and add in SharePoint app this time. Again, it's a bit slow to load, not sure why. I click on SharePoint, and I won't go through the whole process, but I then just select my SharePoint site. I've actually already done it here, and that will create that SharePoint site on a tab. And voila, here it goes.
Something to do with those 44 million users, I guess.
Yes.
So here we are. Here's my site. It's adapted itself for within Teams. It's displaying the content slightly differently, so that it fits nicely in the window it's got. So it is a bit more sophisticated in the way that Teams treats SharePoint sites than other non-Office 365 apps and sites. But it's similar in terms of, to get there, you go to a team and then you go to a tab, which is your intranet.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things here that I'd be keen to point out is that I'm sure there's some people on the webinar who've still see SharePoint as a kind of really clunky system, very difficult to manage, and maybe looking for something which has nothing to do with SharePoint. But I would encourage, if you are like that, if you have a look at SharePoint. It's changed a lot in the last couple of years, and it's much easier nowadays to create something with news like this and pages and things, and that's I think is a very viable option to be able to do it yourself. Very viable, certainly for smaller organizations as well. Okay, let's kind of move it up a notch in terms of sophistication. Yes, can you talk to us about the LiveTiles solution? So Wizdom, you've developed a Wizdom for Teams app that goes in the side rail. Can you talk to us about that and maybe show us that? I think you're on mute, yes.
Yes, would love that. Let me see if I can just share my screen as well. Can you give me presenters?
Yeah, sorry. So you're in this twice, so I might give it to you to the wrong one. Is that the right one?
That was the wrong one.
That was the wrong one. Okay. 1 second. How about that?
Now it works. Perfect. Yeah. So as I also mentioned before, I think it's important. I think you can have the different approaches. The approach that we took was look at what Teams brings and try to embrace that, and that's about tapping into the Teams apps. So we actually made an application that can be placed in the side rail. And the idea with, I think maybe Joe will come more into these apps, but the idea is that you can have these personal apps that are available basically in the side rail, and you can push these apps also from centrally. So it's basically the organization that can push an app out to the end users. So this is an idea on how you can basically bring your intranet workloads into Teams and just having that available as a tool to the users. This concept will allow you to create experiences within this app, and then target those experiences to specific roles in the organization. So it's not like creating a Teams and adding hundreds of tabs. It's basically adding some tabs that give value to specific users. So whether it's about communication, it's about business processes, it's about knowledge management, these are tabs that are available in the app. One thing I just wanna mention, and we actually didn't talk so much about that, but just throughout my experience when doing intranets, and John, maybe you can add a bit to that, is that it's also often important for companies to add their corporate brand to this as well. So add their logo, add their colors, give some corporate or brand personality to these experiences that you deliver to the users to make them feel safe. It's like the corporate safe haven. So at least that's what we added to this, was the ability to add some colors, add some logos, add your text welcoming users to this new experiences. Does that make sense for you, John, as well, just to add some of this corporate branding flavor as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you can see that straight away in the left there. You've got a little tab with the Wizdom logo on it. Obviously what you're saying is that can be the brand logo for the intranet, right, or the organization. Whereas the method I showed, you don't see any branding until you go through the team, and then you go to the tab, which you have to just give it a text name, and yeah, so it's certainly an improvement.
A bit more personal, and then also just adding colors and stuff like that. And the idea is then you can add some specific experiences. This is an example of the COVID. So informing the employees about maybe some safety measures, company policies, everything related to that. It could also be about the communications. Basically ensuring that you can create rich articles, target those. I would actually like to just mention briefly about another opportunity of actually reaching the users with these instead of having them go and find those. But basically giving the tools they know. It can also be overview, a more rich overview of their teams, adding some metadata on teams, adding some extra things on your collaboration experience. But it can also be finding people, org charts, everything. But the idea is that it's not just forcing your intranet into Teams. It's actually identifying the workloads that are important for the users and then bringing them into Teams in a targeted manner, so they're not getting overwhelmed by a lot of information. They get an app that gives them the tools they need to complete their daily work. So one thing I just want to add before just jumping on to Joe is that publishing news, that will still, even though that this is targeted, it will still need the users to actually go and read the news that are targeted to them. So one thing I just want to show you, and maybe just think about embracing the chat capabilities in Teams, is that you can also use chatbots in Teams to actually use it as a means of notifications, like notifying users. So classic intranets might be pop-ups or push notifications, but now when your users are in Teams, you might want to consider using something like chatbots, for example. So this is an example of where you can actually post your news in a controlled manner, but reaching the users with news digests, articles that are personal for them, policies they need to reach out to them with chatbots, because that's embracing native Teams capabilities. They're used to talking with employees or colleagues, and if they have a chatbot reaching out to them to update their profile or read the policy, or this is an important local news or global news, so embracing those tools, I think that makes sense. So embracing the apps and embracing the bots functionality, I think that will give you higher Teams adoption. Basically, yeah.
Great. I think that's a really important point, and a nice illustration of how we can embrace some of the actual functionalities in Teams and move away from this kind of traditional idea of what an intranet is. Because when you do build a good intranet on Teams, I think it's going to be very different to a traditional intranet. It's in some ways perhaps not so good, but in other ways, in really good ways, I think. Like with the conversational interface. So on the subject of kind of pre-packaged apps, I'm going to show you another app now, guys, and I think this kind of takes me on to another topic, which is that this thing around traditional intranets. We might have certain things which you don't necessarily think of as the intranet space, but if you're kind of thinking broadly about bringing your intranet into Teams, it might be about bringing different tools into Teams, which is not just news, it's not just department pages and things like that. And so one example that we use for some of our clients is learning management systems, and so there is a learning management system that we resell called LMS 365, and you can see it's got its own app here. We've pushed that to our Teams environment. Everybody gets that, and that means that we can surface our training to people, which is really useful. And this particular Teams app for LMS 365, by the way, it also comes as a kind of standard kind of SharePoint tool as well, but this is the Teams one, obviously. But it's utilizing that conversational interface as well. So the bot, you can say, for example, show me courses, show my training. And this is training perhaps that I've been auto-enrolled in, and I can ask the bot to show me my training. The bot then goes away to think about it. And it's now coming up with my training. I can browse the different categories of trainings, or I can see the stuff that I've actually been enrolled onto. And so here it's now showing me these are the courses I've been enrolled onto. So there's an access course, and I can just flick through that. So I think that's a nice example of a conversational interface. Then we've got the dashboard. Oh, that's frustrating. Come on. Yeah, so this is so my training dashboard. So it's showing me all of my training that's in that I'm currently enrolled on, and what I've completed, and any certificates that I've earned myself. So that's kind of showing you how a different app could work. But obviously this also goes into the actual Teams, as well as being an app on the in the side rail, it also goes into the Teams experience. So I can be, for example, in my general team channel, and I can go to LMS 365 here. And I could say, okay, I want to post a course on, say, decision making. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually searching the system for a course on decision making. There it is, and I can post that to my colleagues in the team and say, check this out, and then post that in. And then obviously anyone who reads that message, it will come up as an alert in the chat. They can then click that and view that, and actually complete the course right off here. So it's this is another example of some of the sort of functionality that you could bring into Teams that would make it interesting. So Joe, so the final option, and this is perhaps getting them to be the most sophisticated, though not necessarily, and that is that organizations actually develop their own Teams app, because that's not that complicated, is it? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, as you say, it can be as complicated as you want it to be, I suppose. So what I'll show you, I suppose, is kind of a mixed match of everything we've seen here. So perhaps looking at John's idea of adding an existing SharePoint intranet or condense, for instance, into an app alongside other things. Perhaps you've got 4 or 5 different systems that you're using, but you want to kind of roll them up into a dedicated app experience. Teams gives you an avenue for that. We have a built-in app development studio that makes it really easy to create apps. I'm just going to share my screen once I can see it. This one here. So inside of Teams, we have a app studio where we can actually develop apps. And you see here, I've developed one called Pulse, and Pulse is one I've just built for my organization. So it's something that I've added to our corporate app store. I've targeted it to certain users, so it appears in the left-hand rail there, and no one else would be able to see it. It's just available to my corporate users. Now, my Pulse application is actually delivering kind of a few different solutions. It's got some tabs along the top here. One of them is showing the intranet that John showed earlier. Perhaps I don't want to show that. I can hide that in the app development. Or I've got a app for Condense over here. So Condense is loaded inside of my app experience. Company news, I could point to kind of a dedicated article that's kind of popular at the moment. And users can kind of see all the information there, perhaps embed video inside of that as well, or actually link off to a completely third-party system at this point. So a policy management system is what we're using here, called Simplify, and users can then go and see what policies they have outstanding. That's just taking a moment. They can see what policies they have outstanding. Perhaps they're an editor of certain policies and they need to do certain work. I've 3 documents here I must read. I can click them and do certain things with them. So your app that you can deliver can actually be really kind of custom for your company, your organization. It could be just linking off to various systems in that whole way where you're just essentially embedding those systems within here. But we also see experiences through chat that Jess kind of touched upon there, and Dan as well. And our chat experiences could actually kind of make things easier and kind of be a bit of a thinner layer to kind of touch on these other systems. So you see here, I've actually been sent a message from the bot saying I have a policy overdue. There's been a proactive message sent to me that says I have a policy overdue. Steve is the contact person for this. It gives me a bit of information about the policy, when it's due. I get various actions on that, so I can read it now. Perhaps I want the bot to remind me again when I'm a bit freer tomorrow, or I can ask a question directly to Steve, and that could then send an email, kick off a Power Automate, or just message Steve directly in chat. Another great thing is that we get kind of commands where we can just talk to the bot. So I can see here I've got some out-of-the-box commands for my app. This one's around ordering IT equipment. So I'm just going to message the bot, order IT equipment. And the bot has come back straight away with a form that I can actually fill in line in my chat message. So I'm going to order a laptop, and it's to replace existing equipment. I want a Dell laptop. I'll put my phone number in there, and I want it delivered to London by a certain date. And what this can do is when I submit this request, it could actually kick off a approval. So with my line manager, it could go to the IT service desk system. So perhaps it goes into ServiceNow or Salesforce or wherever it needs to go to. And me clicking that request will hopefully generate me a request for IT equipment. So it generated me a service desk ID. It says my laptop's due on this date with some extra information. And I actually get the ability to ask the bot where my order is. Obviously, if we're all used to using Amazon and all these services where we can track at all times where our parcels are, I can actually talk to the bot and say, give me an update on my order. And hopefully the bot will tell me, well, it's currently awaiting line manager. This is my request. And the estimated delivery is actually for today. We've got a really quick turnaround on this one. But if I need to call someone, I have my ID and my service desk number. If I need to cancel my request, I can do that here. Perhaps I have a question, and I can send that directly off to my service desk. So these interactions perhaps are touching on 4 or 5 different systems. Perhaps it's going to an approval with my line manager, it's going into ServiceNow, it's jumping across to our IT equipment ordering system and doing something there. But it's giving it to me in one kind of simple experience inside of Teams. And this is where I think we can kind of get great value with Teams by kind of really simplifying processes, but also kind of keeping all the systems in line, sending it to the right systems at the right times, going through the right approvals, and just making it as easy as possible through the user, whether they're accessing it from their browser, like I'm doing here, from their Teams client, or even from their mobile app. We can create mobile app experiences too with this, and it's, yeah, it really creates kind of nice, quick and easy solutions here.
Great, Joe. I think that's a really interesting demo, and shows that you don't necessarily have to buy off-the-shelf products in order to get a really good result. And I think certainly when it comes to some of the services here that you've spoken about, like, you know, something that allowing you to order your new IT equipment, and that's plugging into ServiceNow, whatever, just shows that, yeah, companies can build something really custom for themselves, and they'll get tons of value from that. And it's not necessarily just going for an off-the-shelf product. Joe, does it take a long time to build these apps? I know that's probably quite a difficult question, but
so the app itself is actually really straightforward. So the App Studio makes it really simple for me to create the app container itself. So if I go into my manifest editor, as it's called here, I get my apps that I've been creating. So my Pulse Intranet app is just simply a series of kind of answering a few questions. It asked me what tabs do I want to put on there. So I've got an intranet, a condense, where I've just kind of specified where it goes to. It's just going to a URL essentially for my tabs. When it comes to bots, it gets a bit more advanced. We have to think about the flow, perhaps putting in things like power automations, all of that sort of stuff does go to that next layer. But creating the simple app container where you can deliver these through an app experience where you're pushing this app to people is really quite straightforward.
Great, okay. I'm very conscious of time. We've hit the hour, it's now 3 o'clock. We don't have enough time for questions. Hopefully you found that useful, and that you can go away and do something with it. You know, whether it's just doing something simple like setting up org-wide teams, or getting more in depth and I don't know, getting the Wizdom app, or developing your own app. If you're interested in any of the stuff that we've shown you today, such as, you know, if you want to talk to us about Wizdom for Teams, or Wizdom in that for that matter, or Condense, or if you want to talk to us about maybe developing your own app, do come and talk to us. Give us a call, or drop us an email. We'd be really delighted to explore this with you. So the webinar has been recorded. It's going to be available for you to download probably in the next few hours. We'll make sure you get that. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. Have a great day.
Cool. Cheers, everyone. Thanks, Jess, for coming along.
Yes.
Cheers.
Bye.